Business Leaders with Paul Blanchard.
Welcome to Business Leaders, a series of one-to-one interviews with the world's most successful entrepreneurs. Today I'm joined by John Caudwell, mobile phone tycoon and billionaire philanthropist. Known for being the UK's biggest taxpayer, he founded Phones for You in 1987 with a handful of brick-sized devices, taking advantage of the then-emerging mobile phone market. In 2013, he signed up to the Giving Pledge, a movement founded by Bill Gates and Warren Buffett that calls on billionaires to commit at least half their wealth to charity. He is also chair of Caudwell Children, which transforms the lives of thousands of sick and disabled children every year, and Caudwell Lyme Co., which promotes the health of Lyme disease sufferers in the UK. John, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
It's been an incredible journey so far. Could you start at the beginning, really? How did you get started being an entrepreneur?
Oh, my gosh. I don't really know where it came from, but I always had this entrepreneurial instinct. So, even as a 4-year-old, I held a sale in my backyard for my Beano books and Dandy books and fire engines and things, and I sold all those out. And it was coppers, of course, and these are old coppers, the 240 pence to the pound coppers in the old days.
That's old school.
That was very old school. Yeah, well, that gives something away, doesn't it? But anyway, it's very old school. And I can't remember how much I made. I'd probably only made 10, 12, 13 pence, the old pence, 1/240th of a pound. But it was quite exciting. But then I'd got nothing else left to sell, no toys or anything. So what I decided to do was go knocking around all my friends' doors to see if I could buy their toys off them. So I went and bought their toys off them so I could have another sale. Now, I don't know quite where that came from. Why would I be doing that at 4 or 5 years old? It sounds ridiculous, but it was there in my genes somewhere. It was definitely embedded in me. And that entrepreneurial flair just lived on forever. And I remember when I was about 7 years old, my father really admired Rolls Royces, and it really stuck in my head. And for some reason, at that moment in time, I had this very clear vision in life. And the clear vision was twofold. It was one, to be very successful and rich, and I had no idea what that meant other than having a Rolls Royce, because that was the epitome of wealth.
It's still a pretty good standard even now, I think.
It's a good standard now, yeah, but I wouldn't use that measure because I'm not that bothered about wealth, but that's a different story. And so there was this Rolls Royce, and then the other part of it was me sitting in the back of the chauffeur-driven Rolls Royce, handing £5 notes out to poor people. So somewhere and somehow there came this vision of a combination of wealth and charity. The wealth bit stuck with me for a long, long, long time. And when I look through my early teens and later teens, it was like a poison chalice, because it was this destiny that I knew was there, and I'd got no clue how to get there. There's no inspirational characters in my life. Quite the reverse. Where I was brought up in the back streets of Shelton and Stoke-on-Trent were terraced houses, and nobody was aspirational, inspirational. Your role in life was to survive and then to go down in the pits and hew coal out of the coal seams, or to go into the pot banks and get silicosis from all the dust, or to work in the steelworks. That was your future. So there was no inspiration or aspiration. And so I've got this sort of burning desire to be successful sitting there within me, but no way of understanding how I got there. And I did lots of stupid things in my younger days. I bred white worms to sell cultures to people who kept tropical aquariums so that they could use this culture to breed their own. And there's a funny story there, really, because I thought this could actually be really successful. So I'd got my mother's garage floor covered in these trays with all these white worms breeding away. And you fed them on porridge oats. I don't know whether any particular brand mattered, but I fed them on porridge oats. And you watched them breed. And then when you bred enough, you package them up and send them to people. Anyway, what I didn't know is that the first big frost that came along would wipe the lot out. So I decided that was the end of that, because in any event, the electricity to heat the garage would have been way beyond any money I would have made for it. It was harebrained, I'd got no inspiration, I'd got no guidance, so I experimented.
But you were learning some entrepreneurial lessons even then about watching your costs,
absolutely.
importance of strategy, viability.
Well, I think the biggest lessons I learned were only a year or two later. I went on to do other things, like I traded embassy coupons that came with cigarette packets. I traded those. I did all sorts of silly little things. I sold life insurance linked to unit trust. That was a bit more successful. That was okay. I was one of the top salesmen at that, so that was fine. But then, desperate at the age of about 20 to find a business, I went and bought a corner grocery shop. Really, pretty much at the times when the supermarkets had completely wiped out corner groceries. It was the wrong product at the wrong time for the wrong person.
But other than that, it was all right.
It was perfect. Yeah, it was perfect. Well, it wasn't actually all right. I'm being over optimistic when saying it. Other than that, it was all right, because my wife had to travel on 3 buses to get to this shop. So not only was it a ridiculous business model, but I made it the hardest it could be, because she had to travel from one end of Stoke-on-Trent to the other. And the other thing I didn't realise at the time is that while she was a great librarian and a real intellectual and a bright girl, she wasn't very good at running a grocery shop. So that was another problem. Oh, and it's her birthday today, but she won't be listening. But happy birthday, Kate. But sorry that I've just criticised your grocery skills, but they were there. She couldn't do it. So I learnt quite a lot from that, and I'll come on to that in a minute. But one of the get-out-of-jail cards for this grocery shop was very much trying to develop some extra products. So I was a keen motorcyclist at the time, and I hit on the idea of motorcycle jackets, which were at the time Belstaff, and it was a local company. And I looked in all the motorcycle magazines, and these Belstaffs were going out, I think at the time, for about £20 a suit. And I saw some discounted by about 10%, and I priced them up at the factory, wholesale, and I realised there was about 50% margin. So I could actually discount them down by a lot more than 10%, mail order, and still make a lot of money. So I invited Belstaff along, their sales guy, along to my shop and said, well, what I'll do, I'll put a few of these jackets and things on a rail in the shop. Now, this is harebrained as well, but there was a purpose behind my madness. I'll put all these on.
I don't care if there was or not. This is awesome. I'm really enjoying this.
Well, the next bit to follow isn't very enjoyable, but not for me anyway. But I put all this clothing on the racking, and nobody bought it. But that wasn't the focus of my model. The focus of my model was mail order, which I told Belstaff about. So I said, they'll go on a rail and we'll also advertise and ship them out mail order. Anyway, the first month, I put tiny little adverts in, just classified adverts, 2 lines costing next to nothing. Sold 4 or 5 jackets. I'm thinking, wow, not just jackets, but suits. I'm thinking, wow, I've made a fortune out of those 5 jackets. It might have been £3 or £4 a time. But my grocery shop in those days, this is a long time ago, 40 odd years ago, and the grocery shop in those days was only making about £20 a week. But suddenly from this advert, I could make most of that money by just shipping out 4 or 5 suits. It was amazing. So I upped the size of the adverts. And as I upped the size of the adverts, something that's not very regular in business happened, but the actual demand for my clothing exponentialized. So usually it doesn't match up proportionally to the advertising spend. It still might be profitable, but it's not. You don't spend more and get exponentially more, that's for sure. Well, I did. So the business is going like a steam train. In fact, I'd only got a 2-bedroom house, and one of those bedrooms was full of motorcycle jackets, motorcycle clothing. And my wife and I would package these up at night and send them out. We'd be permanently ending her day jobs. I was still working at Michelin Tire Company at the time. My wife was in the shop. And we'd do all this packaging and send them out at night. And the business just was flying, absolutely flying. And with that, then I started diversifying into other products. But they were all Belstaff. So there was leather, motorcycle suits, helmets, gloves, and all that sort of stuff. And the business just grew and grew and grew. And in 3 months' time, the turnover had gone absolutely through the roof. And I knew this was my destiny. I knew this was the way that I was going to fulfill that 7-year-old's ambition to be successful. At this stage, charity never came into it. This is all about me and success.
Well, in order to give money to charity, you have to make it first.
Yeah, but, in fairness to that question, I didn't even think about that at that time. It was all, and you're absolutely right, and that's what I tell people now when they ask me for advice. You know, if they're trying to do charity work as well as business, and they're not at a sufficiently level with their business, I say, look, focus on your business first, make far more money as a consequence, and then donate to charity and give it away later. And everybody will win out of that. You'll win, and the charities will win. So it's a good point. But I wasn't even thinking that way. I was just thinking, I've got to succeed. And the business was just going so well. And I felt that this was the start of a mail order giant that was going to happen. And I was going to diversify right the way through a whole range of things. But up to yet, I was spending virtually all my profits in advance on the next advert. And because I was exponentializing the advertising, I was spending probably 5 times as much on an advert one month as I did the previous month. So it was all growing. Anyway, I then got this call from Belstaff. John, we have a problem. And I said, what? What's the problem? They said, well, I don't think we can supply you anymore. I said, what? And I can't tell you how my stomach turned over, because this was my real destiny, my saving grace. This was what was going to make me successful. And all of a sudden, it was disappearing away, and disappearing away rapidly. And that comment, I don't think we can supply you anymore. We got into conversation about it, and apparently, because I was discounting, people were going into the motorcycle shops, the normal suppliers, trying on the suits and finding out what size they were, not buying the suit, and then coming to me to buy.
There's a word for it now. It's called showrooming, but it wasn't there. People go into HMV in Oxford Street, get the DVD box that they want, and then they literally scan the barcode with their iPhone on the Amazon app and get it. You know, it's there the next day.
Well, in which case, I'm educated now, because these people were showrooming. They were the early showroomers. Yeah. And as a consequence, I ended up being a victim, because Belstaff said all of the motorcycle dealers are complaining. They've been customers of ours for 30 years, 40 years. We can't have them upset. We're going to have to cut off your supply. You know, in later years, when I've had more power and strength, I've realised that was retail price maintenance. And actually, the illegality of that could have cost them 10% of their turnover, let alone profit. So what they did, if I'd have had the knowledge and the wherewithal, the power and the money to fight them, I could have probably taken that to the courts, and they would have been badly burnt. But I didn't, and you know, I'm very resilient, but this actually really, really knocked me, because I'd got this business, I was flying it out, and all of a sudden it was going to come to an end.
It's like someone's pulled the rug from underneath you.
It was. I tell you what it was like, and I remember the analogy so clearly, because I described it to people. In those days, it wasn't the lottery, it was the football coupon. It was the football pills where you chose who were the score draws. And if you got your 8 score draws, you won a fortune. You know, I can't remember how much in those days, but millions in today's money. And it felt like I'd filled the football coupon in, got the 8 score draws, and then I'd found out my coupon hadn't been posted. That's exactly how it felt. The sinking feeling in my heart was phenomenal. It was phenomenal, because I thought this was going to be what got me on this path to success.
I've run a business for quite a few decades myself now, nowhere near as successful as yourself, obviously, but every 2 or 3 years you get what I call a kick in the guts moment.
Oh, I had those every day.
Well, there you
had
go.
Those every
you
day,
are resilient then.
But I had them every day, because when I went onto mobile phones, there was a kick in the guts every day. It's just how big a kick. Some of the kicks in the guts, the foot went straight through the gut and came out of your back and took your spine with it. And I can tell you about one of those later. But just to finish this story off, so I'm thinking, what am I going to do? Because I hadn't got the money to pay for the advert now, because the profit from the clothes left me with spare profit, but not enough to pay for these bigger and bigger adverts. So I couldn't refund the customer's money, and I couldn't pay for the advert. I couldn't do it. I was in a mess, a real mess, as a result of no fault of my own. So I had a little plan, which brings a smile to my face today, because Belstaff got a little bit of what they deserved. And what I did was I told the customers that I could supply them if Belstaff would allow me to, but because Belstaff didn't want their customers getting a great deal, they'd cut off my supply, and I didn't have the money to refund to them, but I could send them the suit if you could persuade Bell staff to send the suit.
So they're actually you're telling them the truth there.
Absolute
creating
truth,
an army of
absolute truth, an army of warriors
activists.
on my behalf.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I ended up with hundreds of people, and Bell staff switchboard got closed down with people absolutely furious and violent with them because the chances were they were going to, instead of getting a discounted suit that was a real bargain, they were going to lose the money altogether.
So you whipped up a fan army. You are really you're a social media cutting edge kind of pioneer.
Oh, is that a pioneer?
But yeah, because like a lot of TV shows now in America get a really big fan base, and if the channel decide to, they say, well, there's not enough viewers, they'll cancel it, and then the army descends, ringing the network saying, don't stop Twin Peaks.
Well, they were a powerful army.
Wow.
Because I was at Mitchell Tire Company doing an apprenticeship at the time, as well as these other things, the grocery shop and so on. And I got a phone from Bell staff, a call from Bell staff, who said, "Can you come and meet the directors?" Now, I'm 20 years old, and I turned up, and I could only do it after work at night, so it was about 6:30 on a Friday night, and I turned up at Bell staff and went into this crusty old boardroom, and it really was pinstripe suits and handlebar moustaches and white hair. It was absolutely, the
old school
archetypal boardroom situation.
Wow.
And I go into there and I've got about 6 of them sitting around a boardroom table, and I go and take my seat. And they tell me the problem, which is that they've had the switchboards shut down. They've got customers complaining endlessly, and that their reputation has been badly damaged.
Yeah, by their behaviour.
Absolutely. And I said, well, you should have thought about that
Your
before you were dishonourable with me. You knew I was going to put them in my shop. You knew I was going to mail order. You agreed supply, and now you've cut off my supply and destroyed my business and put me into financial jeopardy as well. Anyway, I had my pound of flesh out of them in terms of the things I said to them, because I was very annoyed. But I think with hindsight, I absolutely let them off the hook. And the agreement ended up being that they would supply all my existing orders, they'd fulfill all of those, and I would then ship those out to the customers. And what that effectively did was got me out of financial difficulty, allowed me to pay for the advert.
But put you out of business.
And put me out of business. I might have made a few pounds, as a net situation for the whole thing. But,
everything you've been building up had then stopped.
Just destroyed it.
Yeah.
And
big lesson.
And it was a goldmine. Do you know what that taught me? Above and beyond, well, the two things, the grocery shop and the Bell staff, two different lessons. The grocery shop taught me the business model that had to be right. It's no good going to the wholesale cash and carriers, buying loads of baked beans at discount rates, bringing them along, putting them on your shelf, pricing them up, serving them out. The model is just flawed because there's too much work per pound of revenue generated. It's just too much. So it's a model that could never, ever be successful. And, of course, that's why the supermarkets took all that. So it could never be successful other than in a very niche sort of situation. So it taught me that. And the second lesson I learned was that no matter how big the corporate, no matter how strong the brand, no matter how trustworthy you might think that they will be, do not trust them. And that lesson has stood me in good stead for 30 years beyond, because I found so many times that big corporates are a bit unanswerable, and they do atrocious things to customers and suppliers, and that they have no conscience. I mean, this is not every corporate and every situation, but as a general rule, I think when you're dealing with a big faceless corporate, beware.
It's constructive caution, isn't it?
Constructive caution. You've got to beware. You've got to deal with them. You've got to deal with them, but beware. Don't just think, oh, this is wonderful. I've got Samsung supplying me now. I can trust everything they do. Because you absolutely can't. I'm not talking about Samsung specifically there. I'm talking about big corporates. But I got bitten many times by the big
scars on your
phone
back
manufacturers, bitten in a big way. And one of those was I was about 5 years in with Motorola, and I'd helped them grow market share phenomenally in the UK. I'd ended up growing to probably about 10%, 15% of their market share in the UK. And at the
We're
time,
back to the biker jackets, aren't you, where you're doing the legwork for them?
absolutely. Well, that's what happens. And I got to, they got to about 90% of world supply at one stage. In the UK, they were 90%, 95% of the UK, and I was about 15% of theirs. And one day, this manager came in, and they'd been trying to manipulate me into a situation for a long time. And I knew they were trying to manipulate me, but they were being smart and clever about it. Anyway, eventually, this new manager came in and introduced himself, and said, "Look, we're not really happy with the volume of business you are doing, and you're distributing, and we only want you to retail." I said, "But it's always been the case. For 5 years now, built the Motorola business up on distribution and with some retail, but I've occupied every channel and pushed the products wherever I could, and you were delighted." And he said, "Well, we've got a change of policy now. We don't want that anymore." So
How convenient.
yeah, and if anybody is going to do that distribution, it'll be me. Now, I thought what he meant was that Motorola were really looking to exclude all distributors and take it in-house for themselves. Anyway, he did manage to terminate my distribution agreement. Once again, whether it was legal or not, I don't know, but at that time, still, I was probably not in the litigious frame of mind. In fact, I've never been in a litigious frame of mind. You just waste time and money on it.
Absolutely, but you stand up for yourself when needed.
But maybe I should have been more litigious, because they took that away from me, and I not gave up, because I attacked them in a different way. I went to Nokia, who were only 1.5% market share, and they got an old phone that wasn't selling, and I managed to do a stunning deal to buy their entire end of stock of this product. Their entire, it had never sold well, and it was obsolete, but only a month obsolete. The next phone was just about to come out, and I did this huge deal, the biggest deal that had ever been done at the time for mobile phones. It was 3,000 units, so that tells you how long ago it was, because 3,000 now, you just ordered that in a
Wednesday, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, not even, because we were selling millions a year.
Okay, well.
But the guy's become a friend of mine since, but he was sales director then, Chris Jones, and we did this deal over a bottle of whiskey, actually, at 4:00 in the morning at my house. Nokia approved the deal, and I bought this 3,000 phones, and they helped me with the cash flow, helped me with it. I flew these things out because they were super cheap. The deal I'd done was phenomenally cheap. Nokia had done me this stunning deal. They were difficult to sell at first, of course, because nobody wanted them. But once they realised they were great phones, the phones started shooting out, and my sales went through the roof. And as a result, Nokia did a special deal with me as well, then on the next subsequent phone. And I grew Nokia from 1.5% market share to 20%. Within a couple of, probably less than a couple of years, probably about a year and a half. And the funny thing is, or the reassuring thing, satisfying thing for me, that was the start of Motorola's decline. And Motorola declined and declined and declined. It's probably because of the product, but I'd like to think that their ruthlessness with me was probably replicated with other people around the world. And that sort of what I would call dishonesty and ruthlessness produced their downfall. But the guy that had said that I'm going to do this, left Motorola and took my distribution agreement with him and set up in competition. Anyway, I managed to see him off as well. So, out of this ruthless disaster that Motorola had put on me, I ended up seeing off a competitor that had caused it, and Motorola's market share declining to a catastrophic proportion. So it's not every day that every dog has its day, but in this case I did win. But I tell you what it taught me, and the manufacturers use this expression regularly with me: we don't want the tail wagging the dog. And what they want you to do is win market share for them, but they don't want you to be too powerful. And if you're too successful, then they want to get rid of you or calm you down, hold you back, because they don't want their eggs in one basket.
It sounds like the hero's journey of the entrepreneur is just like a series of endless challenges where, you'd think the more that you do it and the more you learn, that it becomes less stressful, but actually it just becomes more stressful because the challenges become bigger and bigger the more accomplished you are.
Yeah. Well, mine was a minefield, but that was because really, mobile phones were in their infancy. All of these businesses were fairly infantile and immature in their approach. I don't think most large corporates would behave like that today most of the time. I think it was partly to do with it was a land grab. It was like the gold rush in the Wild West, It was a land grab. Every manufacturer was desperate to get volume, and they hadn't really got ethics and culture properly sorted out, I don't think. And they were prepared to do damage to anybody that threatened in any way their goal.
So like J.R. Ewing in an episode of Dallas from the 80s.
Yeah, it was a bit like that. They were very mischievous, very contriving. I mean, I would go beyond that and I'd say they were dishonest.
Yeah.
The way that they tricked you and treated you it was dishonest. It was unethical and immoral at the very least. Because they just tell you whatever lies they needed to tell you. They just do whatever to manipulate you to where they wanted you.
And so quite apart from the ethics, though, it's actually not practically that effective, because ultimately when you realise someone's a liar and you can't trust them, you stop doing business with them.
You're absolutely right. And, and I think that's why a lot of these manufacturers suffered, because a lot of them just weren't ethical. They hadn't set up ethical quality management structures that did the right thing. And I was very shocked by them. But even in those early years, because this is now the early 90s, it taught me lessons and I was still going to be running the Cordwell Group, which included Phones for You, for the next 15 years. I set it up in 87, as you've said, or late 86, December 86, and sold out in 2006. And so the lessons I learned in those early years were really phenomenal lessons, because I never thought manufacturers would behave like Belstaff. After Belstaff, I did know that Motorola might behave like that. I didn't expect them to, but I knew they might, because I already had Belstaff. And
so the painful early lessons have actually made you a better businessman, a better entrepreneur.
Without doubt. When people say, how much did you enjoy business? Almost zero.
I know.
Almost.
It's tough.
It's tough. It's very, very, very tough. I think you've got to be in an easy business to really enjoy it. That doesn't mean you don't enjoy some moments. But, for many years, I'd be sitting on the edge of my seat like this, and there'd be so many things hitting me. I mean, partly it was because of the growth as well, because we went from me, just one man, to 10,000 people. We went from, a room this size to, we'd got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of square foot at the end. And all this had to be sorted. And we'd got a turnover of a few pounds to 2.4 billion. So, it was partly to do with the growth as well, my ambitious growth. And that was part of the stress of it, of course, big part of the stress. But it was also the way people behave with you, and the way you can't trust their motives or what they say. And you never knew what was going to come from left base to hit you.
You always, you watch mafia films like The Godfather, and Michael Corleone says never take these things personally. But you do, don't you? If someone lies to you or stabs you in the back or leaves or lets you down, how can you not? Well, you're a human being.
I hate lies to begin with. I hate the idea that I might tell lies. I hate the idea of anybody lying to me. I hate lies, full stop. I taught my children from an early age, for example, that if they did something wrong and they lied, the punishment would be 10 times the punishment for doing something wrong. If they've done something wrong, they might not even get punished. I'll talk to you about it. And you might not get punished, but if you lie, you will always get punished. And
no good can come from bad.
No. So you're right, that lying, that is, and of course it is personal, because when somebody's trying to shut you down. But I found that in my business, it's quite unusual, really, because my order of ease of dealing with was the customers with the least of my problems. Yeah, we've got to win customers. We've got to fight like fury for them. We've got to fight like fury to look after them and give them the very best service they could ever possibly have. That was not a problem generally. That was the least of my problems. The next set of problems I had was from competitors. And that was, that was always tricky, because you got some good competitors out there copying or piggybacking what you did, or copying it and improving it. And it was a constant war with competitors, because it was a very, very aggressive marketplace. But those two paled into insignificance compared to managing my suppliers and keeping them on side with me. and keeping them doing the right thing.
Because they were sharks, ultimately.
Were they sharks? Yes, some of them were. So there was shark. The suppliers themselves were probably not. Motorola as a company was probably not. But certain managers within the business were absolute sharks, yes. Yeah. And you never knew what to expect, what they might do. And they'd just do it under the corporate umbrella. You couldn't really get to the guys at the top, and they trusted their guy on the floor to manage the business properly, and I don't know whether they would have condoned it or not. I don't know, really. Perhaps they would have condoned whatever they thought their guy could get away with. I don't know.
We had someone else on the podcast recently that said he loved the idea of being an entrepreneur and he'd done it for decades, but he spent most of his days when he ran his business in the thick of things that were wrong with his business to fix that. If there was an area of his business that was working, that didn't get his attention. So for 5 hours every day, he was actually dealing with crap. And he would go home and then think, well, he'd have the sense of satisfaction of solving it, but he'd also had 5 hours dealing with crap. And he just said, you've just got to get over it because it's tough.
Well, I don't want to turn this into a competition between he and I, but I would say in the last 10 years of running the business that out of a 12-hour day, maybe 10 hours would be crap and 2 hours would be working out how we could gain even better success, grow faster, and so on.
It's quite inspiring to hear that, not to kind of delight in your suffering, but to know that other people are suffering as well, that's the nature of the game.
Well, I think it's important for people to know that, because people paint too rosy-coloured picture of business. And I'm very pragmatic about it and tell people the way it is and the way it will be for them. I try not to put them off because that's the last thing I want to do. I want to inspire them and say, look, this is what you can achieve if you work hard enough and you're smart enough.
But go into it with your eyes open.
But go into it with your eyes open because it might destroy your life. It might cause you to lose your wife and family. It might cause you to lose everything. And that happens a lot. So I think people do have to be conscious that the decision has to be intelligent. They have to understand whether they've got the attributes and talents and whether they've got the right product and the right business plan. And if one of those are lacking, just hold fire a little bit. If you're not sure of your business plan or your business idea, hold fire. If you're not sure you've got the resilience or the dedication and the focus, hold fire. Make sure before you do it, don't rush into business. But for goodness sake, do it overall because we need you all. We need businessmen to prosper and grow from small little acorns into giant oak trees. We absolutely need that. It's the lifeblood of Britain. But I don't want people who are the wrong people getting into the wrong business model with the wrong rosy-coloured glasses thinking this is all going to be beautiful because I think almost never is it beautiful. There's some aspects of beauty, but there's some very ugly aspects as well.
It reminds me of an early episode of The Simpsons where Mr. Burns is giving a talk at Springfield Elementary to the kids about what running a business is like. So he's introduced by the principal, and he just starts and says, family, friendship and happiness. Those are the 3 demons you must slay if you want to succeed in business. Any questions? And that's his entire speech.
It's sort of not a bad introduction, really. I've not heard that one, but in a way, it's not a bad introduction because there were times in my business life where it was only business. And when you come home, you've got nothing left for your children, your wife, nothing, zero. All you can do is be a cabbage, eat your dinner, go to bed and survive till the next day and get back into the battle. And it can be like that regularly. And I have people on Instagram saying the same thing to me when I give business advice. They're saying how difficult it is and tough it is, and and I think, I know all about it. It's darn tough.
But anything that is meaningful in life is tough.
Exactly,
really.
yeah. Because if it was easy, everybody could do it, and if everybody can do it, how can you have a business? Because everybody else can do it as well. So it's not just a matter of being brave and getting stuck in. It's actually a matter of you've got to be smart. You've got to have the talent, you've got to have the dedication, the resilience, and of course the right products and the right business idea. So it's not for everybody for sure.
And there's so many different motivations for starting a business as well. The desire to earn good money is obviously one, but independence, not having a boss, creating something, leaving a legacy like you have.
Yeah. There's a lot of motives. I mean, I think in my case, I didn't have a motive really. I mean, because it was a destiny. It was this Damocles sword sitting over my head that said I'd got to succeed. So And that's quite strange, when you're driven beyond the point of rationalisation. I got no rationale for this. I just got to do it. And when I did get started in business properly, which was when I was mid-20s, and I did start making a little bit of money, it became about financial independence, because my dad had had a stroke when I was 14, left my mother really having to work very, very hard to keep the family supported and surviving. He died when I was 18 of this stroke. And that left me with two real goals. One was to put health as near to the front of everything that I possibly could, and the other was financial security. So my success started off wanting financial security. And I used to count the coppers all the time. I used to count the money and try and work out, what's my security? What happens if this goes wrong? What's my exit route? What's the disaster, the doomsday picture? And always try and see what was going to happen, the very worst event, and could I get out of it and survive it? So I was always assessing it, but it was very much about financial security. And then financial security turned into wealth, just pure wealth, chasing that Sunday Times league position, which when I look back, I'm quite embarrassed about that, because I remember the joy when I was listed as 500th richest man in Britain. And I think, what the heck was that all about? But it was a part of my evolutionary journey, and it did please me at the time. And then a few years later, and I was 22nd richest man, I thought, why am I bothered? And I wasn't actually bothered anymore. I was long since I'd gotten over it, And what it was about then was only about success, because I'd got my financial security, I'd got my wealth. It became about pride, success, and doing things better than anybody else, and having a motivated workforce that would absolutely bust a gut to win, having the best product on the market, the best service. It was all about trying to be the best. And incidentally, we failed at that endlessly during that 25 years of evolution. But never, ever was it anywhere off my agenda than to be the best. Not the richest, the wealthiest, the most successful financially, but the best. But I do actually believe that if you're the best most of the time, the money is commensurate with being the best, because the world recognises that you're doing it properly. And I think you do get the rewards for being the best.
The wealth is the kind of manifestation of your psyche, your desire to win.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what it became. The profit, the annual profit, became a measure of how well we were doing. Not something I can go into my Scrooge's tower and count the money. It didn't matter to me, but it was a measure of success and growth. And then the charity crept in, and journalists prompted this, because they kept asking me, what do you want on your tombstone? And it was a favourite question with them. I got asked lots of times.
The old Spike Milligan joke springs to mind. On his tombstone it says, I told you I was ill.
And so I evolved from not wanting that on my tombstone, to wanting other things. I wasn't sure what, but I knew it wasn't,
Made a ton of money and done a ton of good with it, type thing.
And that's the way and that's when the charitable aspect of me crept in. And it was about 25 years ago, and I joined the NSPCC. I helped Prince Andrew on the Full Stop campaign. And that's really what got me fired up with charity, along with this destiny that I knew I'd got there, but I hadn't thought about it. In those formative years of growing the business, growing the wealth, it was all about business.
Was there a moment psychologically when you started on that charitable giving, the philanthropy route, where you had to authorise a big transfer, you gave someone a big cheque, and that was a moment of you actually giving away a chunk of your wealth?
Yeah, there was actually. I was on the Full Stop campaign, and I was one of the people that was supposed to be gaining donations from elsewhere. So I was a leader, not to donate myself, but to get other wealthy business people to donate to the Full Stop campaign. And incidentally, I was fully touched by the NSPCC and the fact that these kids were sexually abused often by family, close friends, and so on. I thought it was devastating what grown-ups can do to kids and how they can scar them endlessly for life. It's just horrendous, because they scarred them in so many different ways, threatened them and threatened daddy going to jail and all. Just horrible. And And so that really captured my heart, and I was really bought into it. And I was part of this Full Stop campaign, and the idea of the Full Stop campaign was to raise 250 million to over a period of 5 years to stop child abuse. Of course, it never was going to, but
if you can lessen it, that's even worthy in itself, of course.
And it did lessen it immensely. But I remember thinking at the time, I've not really had the time to put into this, because I was turning up for these meetings, which were once every quarter or whatever, at Buckingham Palace. It was lovely. It was a very prestigious thing to drive through the gates.
It's not too shabby.
And it was really nice to do it. But I not many people were achieving that much, and I wasn't either. We did raise a lot of money collectively over the whole thing, but there was 60 people around the table. And with all the events and everything, we did raise quite a lot of money. But I didn't feel that I was doing enough. So my first big pledge was to them. I couldn't part with a big sum of money because I didn't have it. Everything I'd got was in the business. I didn't have spare cash. And in those days, my business wasn't really that successful. It was getting to be.
Wow.
But
so you weren't a billionaire then? So the money you were giving was a big chunk of your actual wealth at the time?
It was huge.
Wow.
It was a huge, it wasn't a huge sum of money, but it was a huge...
Proportionately
to what I'd got as available cash.
Wow.
And I made them a pledge to pay them £500,000 over 10 years. So £50,000 for the next 10 years.
Not to be sniffed at.
So, it was a decent sum of money.
Still
I'd
is.
Spread it over the 10 years because I couldn't have paid it there and then. So I spread it over the 10 years so I could give them £50,000 a year for the next 10 years. And so that was the first big thing I did.
And how did you feel in that moment that you'd given that pledge? Did it feel good?
Pleased,
or did it feel weird and new?
Oh, much better than using it to buy a Ferrari. And this is what most rich people don't get. Or I don't think they do. In fact, I'm certain they don't. I think spiritualism in that way is massively more rewarding than materialism. I think materialism buys you short-term pleasure. It buys you something that's transient that you can have now for a few minutes or a few hours, or maybe in a car every time you get in it. Maybe you feel good about yourself. I don't know, but because it doesn't do that for me, so I can't really comment. But I'm sure for some people, every time they get in their Ferrari, they probably feel pleased about it.
Well, I want a helicopter. You've got a helicopter. I want one of them.
So there you go. That'll be your materialistic
That's the next
pleasure.
one.
Yeah. And my helicopter is invaluable to me for travelling around the country, to get round to meetings. But coming back to the point, I think most materialistic things are momentary.
Yes.
Maybe not a house and maybe not a car, but going out to parties and clubbing and meals, the transitory moments that you have pleasure and fun, and then it's gone. And you might even be a bit depressed the next day because you got too drunk the night before, and you might not be very happy with yourself the next day. But when you give, those memories stay with you, and the feeling of changing somebody's life. And Cornwall Children have changed over nearly 50,000 children's lives.
It's incredible.
I founded it. I've been a massive donor of it right the way through. It raises a lot of money from other people, which it needs to do because it has to stand alone.
Of course.
But I put a huge amount of money in as well. And knowing that I'm the initial instrument that started that off, and the fact that I dedicate a lot of my life now, working hours, to making Cornwall Children more successful and help more people, does give an immense permanent spiritual satisfaction. And it doesn't go away. You go to bed at night, and if you think about it, it pleases you. You wake up in the morning, and if you think about it, it pleases you. We just think about it. Modesta and I think about it all the time. I bet she and I never have a conversation unless charity comes into it. That might sound a bit weird, but it isn't, because we might talk about a lot of things, but always there'll be who's coming to the ball, when should we do the next charity cycle ride, what's happened with this person with charity. There's always the top of our agenda. In every conversation we ever have, there's going to be a charity discussion. Might sound a bit unnatural to most people, but it's very satisfying to both she and I.
Is it stressful in a sense being a philanthropist that you're giving away all these millions and it's incredibly generous, but you also have to turn down other applications from other equally worthy applications? If I run a charity helping, say, army veterans, and I think, well, John's got a lot of money and he's very philanthropically minded, he wants to make a difference, well, can I have £1 million for my charity? And you have to say, look, that's not for me. So you're kind of turning people down as well.
Yeah. But I do have very clear criteria. And in general, those clear criteria we won't break away from. So that then rules out a lot of people who might come to me.
Because you can't literally do everything.
No, you can't do everything. And, you know, sometimes, for example, I'll get a begging letter off from somebody, maybe in a faraway country, that tells me the crisis that they're in. And I do read some of them, and it's sort of heartbreaking. But then I think, yeah, but I've got no idea that this is genuine.
Yeah, that's the
And
problem.
in any event, if I started attending to those individual requests, I'd never get any life done. I would have no life. I'd spend my whole life attending to individual requests, and I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing for cortical children or pandas or Lyme disease or the other things I do. So I have to have my own hardness that I put into my brain, you know, that I mustn't get involved. And I have to say that to myself. You can't get involved.
What's a typical month for you then? What is the lifestyle at the moment? You know, if it was a pie chart, how's it divvied up?
You can't, because every month is different, every week is different, every day is different.
Well, that's exciting.
But it is exciting, yeah. Everything's completely different. I'd like a bit more structure, to be honest, because I never know what country I'm going to be in. I don't know what city of what country and what I'm going to be doing, because I let urgency of need drive my diary. So if I'm suddenly needed to be in France because of, let's say, because of one of my building projects, I'll put a few days in France, maybe try and tie that with some charity cycle ride like we did last weekend for Prince Albert's charity.
Wow, so you're keeping yourself fit as well as helping charity.
Yeah, so we do a lot of cycling together, because Modesta's an Olympic cyclist, and cycling is my main passion, so we'll do a lot of that together. And I'll try and put things together. But if somebody says then, oh, I'd really like you to come, as they did our friend who invited us to an event he's got at his home, and that's in Monaco, well, I just can't do it. If it's not planned in, it's like London. If I need to do an interview in London for something about Lyme disease, about pandas, I can't do it unless it's planned in, and I've got those days in London to be productive and effective, because the travelling time just eats away your life. You know, you end up losing your life on an aeroplane or on a train or travelling or in a car. So, you know, I have to try and do it really effectively. And there's just not enough hours in the day ever. Yeah, so it's difficult.
Tell us about the work that you're doing in Lyme disease, because, and this is credit to your social media activity, but I'd never heard of Lyme disease until I saw an article, that featured you and saying that your family was suffering in it and what you were planning to do. And my first thought was, I've never heard of this. What is Lyme disease? And luckily, as part of your advocacy, the article then explained what it was.
Yeah. Yeah, it...
Had you heard of it before? If you don't mind asking?
I had not until we found that my family had got Lyme disease, and it started off with my son, who had been ill for 10 years, and we found out that he had got Lyme disease and started trying to treat him. But at the same time, then we started looking at other members of the family that had got symptoms that we now recognise that were symptomatic of Lyme disease. Didn't mean it was, but heart arrhythmias, arthritic shoulders, in youngish people, and stomach troubles, lethargy, lack of energy.
It's horrendous.
All of these symptoms that we now know absolutely as Lyme disease, I didn't recognise any of them. Anyway, with understanding more about Lyme disease, we started thinking, I wonder if we've got Lyme disease. So I didn't really think for one moment that the next test that we did, which I think was on my ex-wife, would be positive, but it was. So then we did my daughter, and it was. Then we did me, and I had got some issues, mildish issues, but I had got some. I had got it as well, and it just was all through the family. And I thought, wow, this is unbelievable. And I started realising how severe and debilitating the symptoms were and how widespread the disease was. So I started posting on Facebook about it, and I was barraged with people with the most horrendous symptoms. Our symptoms were bad enough, but our symptoms were nothing compared to the suffering that was going on out there every day by ordinary people who were completely debilitated and unable to do anything.
It's horrendous.
And I realised I'd got to do something about it, so I took the challenge of trying to make it public. And I had a really, really big splash initially, and I did about several TV programmes, nearly every newspaper on the land, and radio stations. And I did it all in 2 days, just hit it solidly for 2 days, and really got Lyme disease out there in a big way compared to before. Still nowhere near big enough even at that time. But it did make people aware, a lot more aware. And I was on Good Morning and the people were citing that, and they were going to the doctors, and the doctors saying, "Oh no, you can't have Lyme disease." Well, John Cordwell said we might have, and so I got cited a lot in those days. And I think what it did was spread enormous knowledge about Lyme disease. But where we are actually and where we need to be, I would say if when I came onto the scene, Lyme disease was almost zero as understood. And we need to, let's say, get to 100. I think we're only at 10, 20 now. A massive splash we made. And then other people like Avril Lavigne getting it, and the rugby player getting it. And, I think, all of these things contribute. And then all the other Lyme charities that are in the UK. So all of this contributes to the knowledge. But it's very slow because the NHS haven't adopted it properly as a chronic illness. So there's a long way to go. And I offered them 6 months ago, I offered them £1 million, up to £1 million, or even more for research, depending on how much they put on, and making sure that the research was going to be something that would move a step towards improving the lives of Lyme disease. They wrote back to me saying, this was the Department of Health, wrote back to me saying, yes, we'll do something, we'll come back to you, we're just considering it. That was 6 months ago. And still nothing.
They won't know how to deal with someone like you because you're a self-starter, you're ambitious, you're motivated, you're agile. They're no disrespect to sort of civil servant bureaucrats, but someone like you, you're a change maker.
But
they
these
don't know
people out there
need
haven't got time.
No, they need that
for these people to just pontificate on it. They're dying every day. They're suffering lives that are unbelievably tragic in some cases. You get all the different variations of Lyme disease, which goes from fairly mild, which might be a mild ME type symptom, it might be stomach trouble or something, but not something that's completely ruining their lives. But for a big percentage of Lyme sufferers, it takes the life away entirely. And they're suffering tragic symptoms that give them no life. And worse still, not worse still, but worse for the health services, they're into every doctor and every specialist that they can go to because they're permanently ill and permanently in hospital and permanently neglected. And they're treating these people for something that's not going to do any good, or just probably giving them a hospital bed, and it's no good. They need to put resource into Lyme disease to understand it and to really start understanding what they can do to diagnose it correctly and then to treat it and to save all of this suffering and all of this huge waste of national health resource after.
Tell us about the annual ball that you host.
Yeah, every year. Well, we have 3 balls actually, but the one
I'd let a doctor see to that if I were you.
I think it's called more balls than most.
Yes,
we can't get serious now, can we?
You made me laugh.
But the pinnacle is on June the 13th this year in London, and that is a phenomenal ball, extremely prestigious, probably one of the most prestigious, well, definitely one of the most prestigious in London. It's a fantastic event. There's 800-900 people go to it. We have fantastic entertainment, and we raise a huge amount of money for charity, always approaching £2 million. So it's a great event. And of course, this is for Cordwell Children. And as we've already said, Cordwell Children helps all the children in the UK that we can that are suffering from 650 different illnesses. And the only qualifier is that they can't get the help on the NHS and that they can't get the help anywhere else. So if they can't get the help anywhere else and they're desperate, they come to us and we can help fix them in some cases, put them right in some cases. In other cases, it's just life improving the life, making the life more bearable and tolerable. And that's just such a phenomenal cause. I think it's a very, very compelling charity for people to support. not just because they're children that have never had a chance in life, but also because I pay all the operating and administrative expenses. So when people donate £1, they know
100
that
pence
pound
goes to the front line.
And it goes to the difference.
It is a problem, isn't it, that when you give money to charity, of course, charities have to be well run, and therefore they have to have managers and insurance and blah blah blah. But there is something to be said if you feel that 100p in the pound is going to the end, the front line.
Unless somebody's got a rich benefactor like me, a charity's got somebody like me, they've of course got the overheads that they can't do anything about whatsoever. But my argument to that is, well, why give it to those charities? Why not just give it to Cornwall Children? Because the more you give to Cornwall Children, the more my overheads go up. Your pound will never get diluted because I'm committed to paying all of the overheads forevermore, or during my lifetime, and then there'll be a legacy left after my lifetime. So these overheads and wages, etc., will always be paid by us. So the pound's never going to get eroded, and we're very careful with what we do with that pound. That money is completely analysed as to the benefit that it brings, and we do have a criteria that we try and achieve every year, which is that every pound produces over £2 of value.
Wow! So there's a philanthropic ROI.
Well, absolutely, and we do that by beg, stealing and borrowing, although, of course, we don't steal, but it's just a phraseology, isn't it? But we try and get everything free. That's our start point, free. So
but you're being entrepreneurial, even within your giving.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, but why shouldn't it be entrepreneurial?
No, I totally respect it.
The person that donates £1 wants to feel their pound is really doing something, not that it's going to get swallowed up in overheads. So we make our pound, it's always manages to achieve about £2 and 9 pence, 10 pence, 11 pence. We've never managed to get anywhere near £3, but I think that's pretty good, that we're over doubling that pound. So instead of the pound shrinking to 50 pence, 60 pence, whatever it is after the overheads, ours doubles to £2. So I always do really think that people should support Cornwall Children first and foremost, because what they'll be doing is the most good for society and costing me the most amount of money. And I sometimes joke that my chief executive is the only charity chief executive in the country whose goal is to bankrupt the boss. Because if she could raise hundreds of millions a year, my overheads would go up to the point that I'd become bankrupt.
And you are an ambassador for all of these causes, and it's important now, given the prevalence of social media and the way the media is working generally, that you not only have to be the philanthropist, but you're also the chief ambassador, and social media is playing a huge role in that.
It is, yeah. Social media is very important to it. But whatever type of media it was, it's just in my heart. So I can't just donate the money. That's not me. I donate the money. That's one thing, but it's me. If you cut me through in the middle, it wouldn't say rich businessman. It wouldn't say party animal. It wouldn't say materialistic person. What it would say is charitable. And that's what gives me my buzz in life, making other people's lives better. I've got all these other causes like Pans Pandas that nobody's ever heard about. And Pans Pandas is going to potentially revolutionise the approach to mental illness in children over the years, because it's infectious disease caused. And that is another cause that just is so close to my heart that I really want to make a difference, a big difference. And if I can die saying I made a massive difference to society, that would be what's on my tombstone.
Tell us about the Cornwall International Children's Centre.
This is just Cornwall Children, really, but it's grown beyond the normal building. So what we did was we decided that we were going to make autism a real speciality within the charity, to prove that we could intervene in children suffering from autism and make their lives better. We've been doing it for 20 years, but we don't have proof. So we built this new centre, which we needed because we needed a lot more space, and I was the major donor for that. Once again, it was a £20 million investment that was made, and I put the majority of that in. Donors have been very, very generous as well, and putting money in. But it was going to happen no matter what. We were committed completely to it, and we've now got 30 clinicians, doctors, and professors in there, all dedicated to children with autism, to diagnosing them very rapidly and to making their lives better. And this now is the next chapter, if you like, of the Caudwell children's story, because not just are we going to help children, but we're going to prove to the medical profession, we hope, that children with autism, their lives can be made significantly better. And all the parents that I've spoken to over the last 10 years have all said the same thing, that when they get the diagnosis from the doctor says nothing can be done. All you can do is keep your child as healthy as possible, but there's nothing can be done. Hundreds of parents have told me the same story. It's tragic and devastating. And I just can't understand really how that story gets out, other than the fact that it must be in the NICE guidelines that says something along those lines. That's where the doctors get their indications from. So we want to change the NICE guidelines. We want to be able to prove that we can intervene in autism, and as a consequence of that intervention, that we can improve the lives for children with autism. And that, of course, spans off across the whole family then. It's the whole entire family that benefits from that. And I'm pretty certain we can do that, and that's the focus for the next 2 or 3 years.
John, it's been a hugely inspirational journey, and I'm sure you're going to achieve a lot more. But thank you ever so much for your time. I've really, really enjoyed it, and frankly, I've learned a ton.
Thank you.
A Right Angles podcast in association with Big Things Media.